الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمد عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. After praising Allah Ta'ala and sending salutations upon our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we ask Allah Ta'ala to guide us constantly throughout our lives, to allow us and enable us to seek beneficial knowledge, and grant us His pleasure, His closeness, His nearness. Ameen Ya Rabbal Alameen. May Allah Ta'ala bless you all and bless your families as well. Now, today we will be doing the integrals of Salat. We'll be discussing regarding the integrals, those things which are necessary in the prayer itself. So we've talked about the conditions of prayer, which are prerequisites to the prayer, things that are needed to be done before the prayer starts. So you have to make sure you meet those requirements. Next comes those things, now we're talking about those things which are integral, important, fard, necessary, in the prayer itself. So without those things, the prayer doesn't count. So there are 6 of them, and we will discuss regarding each one of them in detail. There are certain details for each and every one of them, and inshallah we will discuss these details. So this is what we will be doing for today. I think because there are quite a lot of details here regarding the takbir tahrima, also the concept of standing, then the recitation, and also regarding prostration. So there are quite a bit of details there. So I think it will take us our full session just to do that much. So I think we will just be doing the integrals today. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. So now we move on to the integrals of the prayer, which are known as the arkan. Those integrals, the difference between integrals and conditions. So the conditions are prerequisites that are required before the prayer, which are also fard, necessary, obligatory to do. Now the integrals are those actions or those things that a person must do in the prayer for the prayer to be accepted. So this is again the fara'id, the fard of the actual prayer itself now. So there are 6 famously mentioned. The first one there's a bit of a contention on. So the first one is the tahrima, saying Allahu Akbar. So saying the Allahu Akbar is what is meant. The raising of the hands is part of the sunnah. But the saying of the takbir, saying Allahu Akbar, that is a rukn, a integral. A person must do this. But the question arises that is it an integral or is it a condition? So we prayed it in the conditions, that it came over there that it is part of the conditions. That's because according to Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf, meaning the Shaykhain, according to the 2 of them, it is a condition. Whilst according to Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayhi, the tahrima is an integral. So that's what he mentions here, the tahrima according to Imam Muhammad, whilst so that's an integral, whilst according to the other 2 Imams, meaning Shaykhain, it is a condition, a shart, as mentioned above. So the reason you can understand is because how do you enter into the prayer? You enter into the prayer by saying Allahu Akbar. Once you said Allahu Akbar, now you have entered into the prayer. That means that Allahu Akbar cannot be an integral part of the prayer. It has to be a prerequisite for you to do that, to enter the prayer. So that's what Shaykhain are arguing. But Imam Muhammad says it's so closely connected that it's virtually an integral. When you say Allahu Akbar, you are in the prayer. So it's part of the prayer as well. So it's a bit of a, you can say, just a point of discussion Some books have argued for length to try to explain this, but I'm sure you can understand whether you count it as an integral, whether you count it as a condition. Both have understood it to be necessary. So that is regarding the tahrima. But we mentioned previously as well, it's important that a person says it audibly, meaning says it loud enough that you can hear yourself in a quiet room, in a perfectly quiet room where there's silence and no other noise. If you were to say it, you should be able to hear yourself. Or if somebody was to put their ear to your mouth, they should be able to hear you. Not that you say it miming or in a way whereby you can't hear any sound coming out or there's no movement at all. This would not be articulating the actual tahrima. So the tahrima must be actually said, and in order for it to be said, like I said, it has to be said to an extent where a person can hear themselves. And if there's a noisy room, they'll have to actually, say it so loud. But obviously, if a person is mute, then it's not a condition that they say, obviously, because they're mute, they're excused. And likewise, if a person, you don't have to, even to the extent that if a person is mute, they don't even have to move the lips to mime it. So moving the tongue, that's not necessary as well, because the whole purpose of moving the tongue and moving the lips is so that the sound comes out. But if this person is mute and there's no sound coming out, then the person does not need to do this. But if a person is deaf, then obviously they say it loud enough that they can't hear themselves, but somebody else would have been able to hear them, who was close by, putting the ear to the mouth. That's what the understanding of this is. So that is how loud to do the takbir. As far as the saying of the takbir is considered, then a person must say the takbir while standing up. So that's also necessary that it be done whilst standing up. So if a person went into ruku, for example, and they were more or less in ruku and then did takbir tahrima, because they were rushing to try to catch the imam. So if they were closer to the ruku position and then they said the takbir Allahu Akbar to start the prayer, that will not be valid. So it's important that a person does the tahrima whilst standing up. So that's all part of this first integral that has been mentioned over here. So these are all important parts to understand. Number 2 is standing if one is physically able, except for voluntary prayers. So there's quite a bit here we're going to explain. Standing, firstly, standing. So standing is an integral part of the prayer. Now, this standing is obviously for a person who's physically able to stand. If a person is unable to stand, physically they're unable to, then they are excused. It's fine, they don't need to stand. If a person is able to stand for a little while, then they will stand for that little while. And then if they cannot stay standing up anymore, then they can sit back, they can sit down, they can sit on the chair, they can sit on the floor. They would be excused from standing up. But they must, do the amount of standing that they're able to do. So standing is an obligation. Now, if a person is able to just stand, like I said, just for the duration of tahrima, Allahu Akbar, then they sit down because they can't stand any longer, then that's fine as well. If a person is able to stand leaning on a staff or a stick, a walking stick or something, then they can do this too. They can stand in this manner, it's no problem. They will stand in that manner. They don't need to if it's difficult, but obviously if a person wants to, they can do this. So this is regarding the standing, and then it mentions except for voluntary prayers. So in voluntary prayers, the nawafil, a person is excused from standing without an excuse. So if I am able to stand up and I want to pray my voluntary prayer sitting down, I can do this without an excuse. But the catch is that the reward for that prayer is halved, because I'm able to stand, but I chose not to stand. So because of that, the reward is halved. half reward for that prayer. So if a person was to stand up, they would get the full reward. That's the difference if a person in a voluntary prayer sat down and prayed. But you don't need to, in the other prayers, in any other prayer besides the voluntary prayers, so the fard prayers, the wajib prayers, as well as the sunnah mu'akkad of fajr, the two sunnats of fajr. These are the only two sunnats that are exempt from that voluntary prayers exception. So all the fard prayers, as well as the wajib prayers, as well as the two sunnats of fajr, these prayers, they cannot be prayed sitting down without an excuse. So if a person wanted to pray these prayers sitting down without an excuse, they have missed an integral and their salat will not then count. If they were excused, then their salat will count. Now, if a person prayed a prayer sitting down with a valid excuse, then their reward is not halved, even if it be a voluntary prayer. So the reward will not be halved if a person has a valid excuse to sit down. So this is the rulings of the qiyam, as we call it, the standing position. Now, what is defined as standing? Standing position is where the hands, if they were to be stretched out, then the hands would not reach the knees. So if the hands do not reach the knees, as long as their hands do not reach the knees, that person is considered standing. As you bow down, the more you bow down, and now the hands, the tip of the fingers reach the knees. As soon as that happens, this is no longer considered standing. So a person who's hunchback, a person who is however they are, they got long hands, the person's, if they stretch their hands out, they don't reach the knees, then this person is considered standing. Obviously, you can have excuses from this exceptional cases. If there is any exceptional cases, then you can consult a mufti who will answer that particular exception. But otherwise, generally speaking, these are rulings of standing up. Moving on, now we come to the third integral, which is recitation of the Quran, even if only one verse. So if a person was to recite only one verse, but a verse which is considered with at least two words, so for example, ثُمَّ نَظَرَ, so because this is a short verse, a very short verse, but it has two words in it, so this will be considered to be the integral being done, that you've recited at least one verse in any two rakats of the obligatory prayer. So you can read this in the first rakat or the second rakat, in any two rakats of the obligatory prayer. So you have to pray in the first and second, or the first and the third, or the first and the fourth, and you can work out the second and the third, second and the fourth, and so on. So this is in obligatory prayers. So any two rakats of obligatory prayer must consist of recitation, and the minimum recitation is at least one full verse consisting of at least two words. If it consists of less than two words, then the salat will not count. So if a person was to say, to recite, for example, Alif Lam Mim, because Alif Lam Mim, this is one verse, is considered to be one verse, but it only consists of one word. Likewise, Yasin or Taha or Hamim or Alif Lam Ra, or any of these shorter one verses, that are one verses, because they are only one word, though they are one verse, it will not be good enough to recite them. So you will need at least a verse consisting of two words, two separate words, like we explained, ثم نظر, ثم عبس وبصر, ثم أدبر واستكبر. This is considered, according to some, to be a very short 3 verses in one row. Or you can say other ويل للمطففين. So it's 2 words in one verse. So this is necessary. A person must recite this much at least for the integral to be done, for for it to count, for the recitation of the Quran to be considered to be a recitation. And this must be done in fard prayers, in any 2 rak'at. So if it's a 3 rak'at prayer like Maghrib, the person recites in the first rak'at and the second rak'at, or the first rak'at and the third rak'at, or the second rak'at and the third rak'at. So this much at least, if 2 rak'ats have been recited in, 2 units of the prayer have been recited in, then the obligatory recitation is done. Now, if a person is performing any other prayer besides the obligatory prayers, besides the fard prayers, so you got the wajib, witr, which is wajib prayer, or the any other sunnah prayers, or any of the nafil prayers, then you have to recite, a person you will have to recite in every rak'at. So in the witr, you have to recite in all 3 units, all 3 rak'at. In a 4 rak'at sunnah, you have to recite in all 4 rak'at. Likewise, in any nafil prayers, if a person prays 2, then you have to recite in both. If a person prays 4 rak'at, then you have to recite in all 4. So like that, a person will have to pray in all, pray meaning the recite the Quran, the minimum of 1 verse at least. Even if that same verse be repeated, you prayed that first verse in the first rak'at and that same verse is repeated in the second rak'at, then that is still recitation which was necessary here. So in the voluntary prayers, so he says, and in all rak'ats of witr and voluntary prayers. So a person must recite in all these rak'at. So the only time a person is excused, he says, unless one is a follower in a congregation. So when a person is a muqtadi, a follower in a congregation praying behind the imam, then they will not recite any Quran. In fact, it would be disliked to recite the Quran behind the imam, whether the prayer be audible prayer, whether it be a fajr, a maghrib or isha, or in Ramadan like we pray witr together, or whether it be the silent prayers, the inaudible prayers like the dhuhr or the asr prayers. It will be disliked for a person to recite, the follower to be reciting. Why? Because we have a hadith, like we explained previously, that man kana lahu imamun fa qira'atul imami qira'atul lahu. Whoever has an imam, the imam's recitation is recitation for him, for the follower, meaning. So we should not recite in any prayer behind the imam. So the only thing we don't do behind the imam is the recitation, meaning the Quranic recitation. Anything connected to it, like the ta'awudh, like saying A'udhu billahi min shaitanir rajim, saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, this will also not be done. So when a person starts their prayer, they will read the thana, Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika wa tabarak ismuka wa ta'ala jadduka wa la ilaha ghayruk, and then stop. Do not recite anything beyond that behind the imam, even if it be Surah Al-Fatiha. So reciting Surah Al-Fatiha behind the imam will also be considered disliked, according to our Hanafi school. So we do not recite anything behind the imam. The hadith which mentions about the prayer being incomplete for the person who is not praying Fatiha, we consider that to be when a person is praying alone, not when a person is praying behind the imam. Because behind the imam, we look at the other hadith. And the hadith which says generally that a person who does not recite Fatiha, their prayer will not be accepted, that's outside of the fard realm, meaning outside when a person is not praying behind the imam. So we do consider that hadith too. We agree with that hadith too, but we put context onto that hadith because of this other hadith that exists. So this is how we understand it. So anyway, many people may approach you, may say this to you, that Fatiha you have to recite and whatever else. That's no problem. That's according to their school. But according to our fiqh of jurisprudence, our school of jurisprudence, we do not recite the Fatiha or do not recite any of the Quran behind the Imam. And like I said, it's going to be disliked to recite behind the Imam. So because the Prophet ﷺ, he expressed disapproval when some people recited behind him, and so this disapproval led to us understanding and deriving the concept of it being disliked. Plus we have verses of Quran that when the Quran is being recited, then remain silent. So listen attentively. فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ. So verses like this, وَأَنصِتُوا, and remain silent. So this is all going to mean that a person behind the Imam will not be reciting the Quran. Now, as mentioned regarding the Takbir Tahrima, the opening Takbir, you have to recite the Quran audibly. You have to actually utter the words of the Quran. So this is again said in a way whereby one can hear themselves and in a quiet room, like I explained. Likewise, you have to recite the Quran in the standing position for the person who is standing, if you're standing, whilst you're standing. So if you're doing the standing position, if you are doing the qiyam, then a person must do the recitation in that position. And likewise, if a person is substituting the standing by sitting down onto a chair or on the floor, then you do that recitation in that substituted position. In that position now, you have to do the recitation. The point is that you can't do the recitation in your ruku or in your sujood. You can't say, I'm doing my recital in the actual bowing down or in the prostration or in the last sitting or something. I'm doing the recitation of the Quran in that posture. No, the Quran recitation, which is necessary, must be done in a standing position or anything which substitutes that standing position. So this is what is understood over here. Now moving on to the fourth integral, which is the bowing down, the ruku as we call it. So this is the bowing to the extent, the definition of this bowing, minimum bowing, is where a person bows their head as well as their back, not just bowing the head. So you have to move the back as well. So bowing the back as well as the head, both have to move to the extent where the fingertips, they reach the knees. So if they reach the knees, this is now a ruku'. So we talked about the standing position, which was that it does not reach, the hands do not reach the knees. And if the hands do reach the knees, that is now bowing down. Technically, according to Shari'i definition, this is now considered to be ruku'. So this is the minimum of ruku', that a person bows to this extent. But if a person wants to perform the complete bowing down, the complete ruku', then it is where the head then becomes in line with the posterior, becomes in line with the back. So it becomes in line with the back passage. So when a person is fully bent, come down to the extent where the head is in line with the posterior and the back is also straight like this, then this is a complete prostration. The hands would then be placed on the knees, gripping the knee, spreading the fingers apart and gripping onto the knee. So this is how a person should prostrate, should bow down, should I say, and this would be the complete way of bowing down. Now the next integral is number 5, is the prostration, meaning the sujood. So a person prostrates, puts their whole body or whole self onto the ground. So now that is done, sujood, namely with one's forehead, both hands, both knees, and the bottom of the toes of both feet. So the bottom part, when you're standing up, the bottom part of the toes. So you bend the toes, you press down on the toes, so that the toes, the bottom part of the feet, the bottom part of the toes are then pressed against the ground. So this is how a person performs the prostration, but this prostration is the complete way of prostration. The forehead, as well as the nose, the hard part of the nose, not the soft part of the nose. So you have to put the soft part down a bit more harder, so then the harder part of the nose would get down. So the forehead and nose, both hands, both knees, and like I said, the toes, but you press down. So this is 7 limbs, the forehead and the nose counting as one, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 2 knees, 6, 7, the two feet. So these are 7 limbs which we were told in the hadith to prostrate upon, and this is why this is the complete prostration, and a person prostrates in this manner. Now, if person, the minimum prostration for it to be done must be, so forehead, one hand out of the two, one knee, any one knee, and one toe of any of the 2 feet. So one of the toes, so one toe, one knee, one hand, and forehead, that minimum must be placed down for the sujood, for this prostration to count. If this much is not placed down, then the sujood, the prostration, will not count. So this is the amount that is necessary to place down onto the ground. And the prostration, which is done in a full manner, I've already explained. Now, when it comes to the prostration, a person needs to make sure that the prostration is done, in order to fulfill it in the best way, is done in a way whereby their stomach is not leaning and resting on the thigh. Likewise, for a man, the man is told to spread the limbs. So therefore, the flanks, our under armpits area, the upper arm area, all of that should be spread from our sides, from our bosom. It should be spread out. The hands will be placed in a normal posture, not necessarily in a posture which is tight, not necessarily in a posture which is spread out, just normal posture of a person. So this is all in order to make the prostration, the sujood, more perfect. Performing the prostration, a person, whilst doing this, must make sure that the forehead, when it goes down, is not elevated, is not being done. Basically, the sujood cannot be done, the forehead cannot be placed on something which is elevated more than 25 centimeters. So more than 25 centimeters, if the sujood is being done on something which is that high up, more than 25 centimeters, then the sujood will not count as actual sujood onto the ground. So this must be made sure that a person is not prostrating on something which is lifted, elevated too high. Slight elevation is fine, anything elevated a little bit is fine, but 25 centimeters, which is in essence the books mention more than half an arm's length. So half an arm's length, 1 arm's length is about 50 centimeters, so half an arm's length, 25 centimeters roughly. So this is where we're getting 25 centimeters from, because it says nisfu dhira, half of an arm's length. So a person should not have elevated. So if the place in front of you, maybe it's a platform or it's a stair or something like this, it can't be so elevated that it's this much. If it's slightly elevated, then it's fine. The prostration is okay, it'll be done. Likewise, when prostrating, a person must make sure that they're not prostrating on something which is it continues sinking. So when you place your forehead onto the ground, then whilst you are in the prostration, you are going to constantly be sinking, 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 constantly be sinking. So if you are not placing your head with pressure, if you're placing, should I say, if you are placing your head with pressure, not too much pressure, but you're placing your head on pressure with pressure, then what will happen? Your head will carry on sinking. Like if a person was standing on like a pile of rice, for example, there was a whole pile of rice, a person was standing on it, and they prostrated onto that rice. Now they're praying on that rice. Now the rice is such that if you, the more you press, the more it will, your head will just carry on sinking. So then this will not be fine. Your salat will not count. Or if there's a pile of straw, for example, hay, dried straw, and a person prostrated and prayed, performed on there, not packed tightly, but just the straw, hay that's loosely there, then a person's head would continue sinking. Or if there's cotton, or if there's snow, in fact, if a person, it was a fluffy snow and a person, it was a whole pack of it, and the person prostrated on it, the more you press, the more you'll go down. So then the prostration won't count until you actually hit a point where you've now hit the ground, or you've hit such a firm grounding that your head will no longer sink. Then if you have placed your head there, now on your hands and your knees, same thing, you placed your head, all these parts on such an amount of ground, or such a firm grounding, then that your prostration will start counting from there. So nowadays you get these really thick memory foam mats. So some people want to prostrate onto that, but you have to be careful with that it can't be so thick that a person continues sinking, sinking, sinking. By the time they've said their, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim 3 times, but they're still sinking and they've already got up. So they've not actually performed because they never settled onto the ground. So the main thing is that you have to settle onto the ground. So then the hands, the head, the forehead, the knees, like I explained, and the toes, they have to settle onto the ground, whereby you are not sinking anymore. So if there was something which is more like carpet, is such that you're not going to carry on sinking. You will get grounding, even if it be thick carpet, you get grounding, and then you won't carry on sinking. Like if you're praying on a mattress, for example, that would be something that you can carry on pressing down, carry on pressing down. You will, a thicker mattress, you will carry on pressing down, and it's not going to count the salat on that. So this is important to understand nowadays. A lot of people performing prayers in this way, and their prayers are not going to be accepted if they're praying on something which is continuously, constantly sinking. I hope this has made sense. I think, is there anything left? Sorry, just going to check quickly my notes here. So we're talking about prostration. So it says prostration, namely one's forehead, both hands, both knees, and the bottom of the toes of both feet. And I think that is the main parts for that. So we move on to the next integral. So the next integral we're saying is the final sitting for at least the length of tashahhud. So meaning you sit in the final sitting, just before a person says the salam and finishes their prayer, a person must sit for a duration where they could have recited tashahhud. You don't have to recite the tashahhud, because the reciting of tashahhud is going to come later on. That's not a necessary, meaning it's not one of the integrals. But what is integral, though, to sit for that duration. For what duration it is, so that a person can recite all of at-tahiyyatu lillahi wa salawatu all the way up until the end, until abduhu wa rasuluh. So a person can recite all of that until the end of tashahhud, in a fast pace, even if it be, and that duration, a person would have sat there for that much. So this is an integral that a person must sit for that duration. Now this sitting must be also done at the end of the prayer. So it must be done. So for example, if a person was sitting for that duration, even recited the tashahhud, then realized that, oh no, I missed a rakat, or in fact, I missed the sujood. I only did one sajda. So in the sajda, I forgot to mention that they were both sujood are integrals. So in every rakat, there are two sujoods. So both sajdas are integral, not one sajda, both of them. So you have to have done both sajdas. So if a person remembered that, oh, I only did one sajda, but they already did their at-tahiyyat, they already sat for the final sitting. Then they made up for their prostration of sujood, so they made up for it. Now they would have to perform that final sitting again. So they have to recite the tashahhud again. And after doing that tashahhud, they will then do the sajda of sahwa, the sajda of mistake, which they will do salam for, which we'll talk about later on. And then they will do the at-tahiyyat again at the end. So this at-tahiyyat, the tashahhud, has to be done at the end of the prayer. So this is an important thing to understand here as well. Finishing off here, that it is obligatory fard for the one praying to end the prayer by his own action. So you must end the prayer with your own action. Then it says it is contrasting this. It is mandatory wajib. So it's not fard now, but it's wajib that this action be saying the word as-salam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah twice for every prayer, as we shall mention below, because now we're going to talk about the wajibat, the mandatory wajibs of prayer. So we say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So you turn the head to the right and the left, and saying this salam is wajib, but ending the prayer with your own action, that's fard. So what that means is, I'm just using an example. If a person, for example, prayed all of their prayer, got to the tahiyyat, recited at-tahiyyatu lillahi salawatu, all of that till the end, and then they had the urge to pass wind. So they passed wind, and they broke their wudu. In essence, at the same time, they also ended their prayer in that way. So they ended their prayer by passing wind. This is an action that they have done on their own. So the obligatory fard of ending the prayer on their own action is done then. So you don't have to do anything here now. Obviously, it's still, you've missed a wajib out, which was to say the salam. So this is going to be disliked. There's going to be dislike attached to your prayer now. But the obligations, the integrals are done. That's the idea. But it would be mandatory, wajib, to repeat that prayer because you still have to do one salam. So yeah, that is that. So as an example. But if, for example, to contrast that, if the prayer ended without your action, it wasn't your own action. So for example, a person performed tayammum, the dry ablution, right? And the dry ablution, as we know, becomes invalidated as soon as you find water enough for you to do wudu. So they performed dry ablution for wudu, they had no water for wudu, and they were praying. So whilst they were praying, they prayed the tahiyyat. Now, before they ended the prayer with salam, somebody brought water. Now, their prayer has ended because they're going to have to now use that water. They haven't finished the prayer. They're going to have to use that water to do wudu with. So now their prayer would have ended, but not with their own action. This is with somebody else's action. So now what will happen? They have not ended the prayer. The integral has not been done. They can't say my integrals are done. Or if they, for example, started bleeding, the wound started bleeding, and it came out everywhere, and they were not an excused person. But if they, for example, they wounded and they pressed the wound and they made themselves bleed, that is their own action. So you can understand what this means now when it says ending the prayer with your own action is an integral. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So alhamdulillah, today we finished off the integrals of prayer. We talked about what integral is, the parts that are necessary in the prayer itself, the arkan as we call them. So there are 6 of them. Just remember them, learn them by heart. If you learn them in parrot fashion, by heart, it will be easier. So takbir tahrima, qiyam, qiraat, ruku, two sajdas, and qaida akhira. So the takbir tahrima, as we explained already, the saying of Allahu Akbar. So the saying of it, not raising the hands, the action is not the necessary integral. The saying of the takbir tahrima is the necessary integral. So the takbir tahrima, then qiyam, the standing position. We talked about the details of that, what it means, and when a person is excused. And in the nafil prayers, a person can choose not to stand, but then the prayer will be halved in reward. So that's the qiyam. So takbir tahrima, qiyam. Then the qira'ah. So we talked about qira'ah, the recital of the Quran, how much is necessary, at least one verse. Some people obviously do say one long verse or three short verses. That we're going to talk about later on. But this is one verse which is necessary, at least a person must recite. If a person has no Quran, meaning recital with them, they've just accepted Islam, or they've just come into accepting, just come about, just understood how to pray right now, and they don't know at all any Quran, then that's fine as well. A person can just say Allah or Allahu Akbar or Subhanallah, say something like this, say tasbih, and that would then substitute the Quran recital for that person, for the amount that they do not know. But I'm sure everyone knows Alhamdulillah, and Alhamdulillah is obviously part of Surah Al-Fatiha. So this person should be taught the minimums, just something, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, just that much, which is the first verse of Surah Al-Fatiha. At least the person can recite that much to fulfill the integral. So this is the Quran recitation, which is the third one we talked about. So takbir tahrima, qiyam, qira'ah. Then ruku', the bowing down, and then the sujood, the prostration, going down onto the ground, and we talked in detail regarding them too. And then lastly we have the qaida akhira, which is the final sitting for the duration of tashahhud, for that duration that a person would have been able to recite the tashahhud. So that duration of sitting, even if it be done in a silence, a person sat for that duration for silence, then they worked out that much is enough time, the integral would have been done. Then it mentioned that ending the prayer with your own action, that's also integral, that's also fard, necessary, that a person does, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh. Okay, so this is our summary for today.